People always whispered that the Black Ridge biker crew was nothing but trouble. But on a bright summer morning, as a scared teenage boy stood frozen on the sidewalk outside a crowded small-town diner, shaking with a secret he couldn't tell anyone, he had no idea that the very bikers everyone feared would be the ones to change his life forever. Before the story begins, make sure you subscribe so you never miss powerful, real-life-inspired stories like this one. It was a warm daytime Saturday in the small town of Ridgewater, the kind of town where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. People liked it that way. The streets were quiet, kids rode their bikes, and families filled the sidewalks with grocery bags and weekend smiles. The diner on Main Street, Betty May's, was already bustling with the morning crowd. Fresh coffee steamed through the open door, and the faint sound of old country songs hummed through the speakers. And right outside that peaceful picture stood 15 roaring motorcycles. The moment people heard the low thunder rolling up the street, they looked up nervously. It wasn't just any biker group. This was the Black Ridge crew, a gang people avoided without question. Big men in bigger jackets, roaring engines, tattoos climbing up their arms like vines, and sunglasses that hid what they were thinking. They pulled up in a long, intimidating line, tires crunching against the pavement, and parked right outside the diner. Inside, forks paused halfway to mouths. One man whispered to his wife that they should probably leave the moment their food arrived. A waitress froze by the coffee pot, her hand trembling slightly as she watched the bikers dismount in slow, almost ominous unison. No one knew what they wanted. No one wanted to ask. And on the opposite side of the street stood a boy named Daniel, 14 years old, shoulders hunched under the weight of a backpack that looked heavier than he was. He wasn't afraid of the bikers at all, unlike everyone else. He wasn't afraid of how loud they were or how the sunlight glinted off their metal chains. No, Daniel was afraid of something else, something much closer to home. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the diner entrance. He had walked all the way from the outskirts of town because he needed help, not the kind of help a kid should ever need to ask for. His voice was stuck in his throat, and his stomach churned with fear. He kept rubbing his wrist where faint bruises were forming, trying to hide them under his sleeve even though no one was looking. The lead biker, a tall, broad man named Hawk, noticed him. Hawk had a thick beard and a face that looked like it had seen more storms than most people could handle. He took off his helmet, revealing eyes sharper and kinder than anyone expected from a man his size. The other bikers joked and stretched, but Hawk kept watching the boy. There was something off. Instinct told him the kid wasn't just hanging around. Inside the diner, Betty May whispered nervously to her cooks that something bad was bound to happen. People didn't trust the Black Ridge crew because years ago, before Hawk took charge, the gang had been known for throwing fists more than offering help. But Hawk wasn't the old leadership. He had changed the entire direction of the group, dedicating them to community charity rides and veteran support and doing quiet good everywhere they went. The problem was, the world always remembered the worst version of people. Daniel didn't know any of that. He only knew that his friend Kyle had once mentioned that bikers protected kids when no one else did. Daniel wasn't even sure if it was true. But when he spotted the motorcycles rumbling in front of the diner, something in him whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment he needed to take a chance. He took one shaky step toward them, then another. Then his courage faltered and he froze again. Hawk walked toward him first. People inside the diner held their breath. They expected trouble, assumed the biker was about to scare off the kid or bark some order. But instead Hawk crouched down in front of him to get on eye level. "You lost, kid?" Hawk asked, his voice rough but steady. Daniel swallowed hard. "No, I don't know." "You look like you know something ain't right," Hawk said. "You waiting for somebody?" Daniel shook his head. His eyes darted back to the diner, then down to his shoes, then toward the bruises he was subconsciously clutching. Hawk noticed everything. Years of reading people on the road had sharpened his instincts. "Come on," Hawk said gently. "Talk to me." Daniel stepped back, shaking his head. "I shouldn't. I'm not supposed to talk to anyone." That sentence hit Hawk like a bell ringing in the wrong tone. Not supposed to talk to anyone. Kids didn't say things like that unless someone dangerous taught them to. Inside the diner, people watched the scene unfold with growing curiosity. Betty May pressed her palms to the counter. Some customers leaned forward in their booths, eyes wide. Conversations died as the town watched a moment they couldn't understand. Hawk stood slowly, motioning one of his crew members, Tank, to come over. Tank was the opposite of his name, big, yes, but soft-eyed and quiet. Tank approached with a concerned expression and gently smiled at the boy. "You hungry?" Tank asked. "We were about to go inside. If you want pancakes, trust me, this place makes the best." Daniel's lips parted slightly. Nobody had asked him if he was hungry in weeks. His home life was a shadowy place filled with yelling, thrown objects, and nights spent hiding behind the basement door. His mother had left 2 years earlier, and his father had turned into someone he barely recognized. Angry, unpredictable, and often violent. The last thing his father told him that morning was, "If you talk to anyone, I swear you'll regret it." And Daniel believed him. But Daniel also knew he needed help. His father had passed out again that morning after another night of drinking, and Daniel had finally reached his breaking point. He packed a bag and walked out. Now that he had come this far, his fear and hope were tangled inside him. But fate wasn't done twisting the story. Because just as Daniel opened his mouth to respond, a pickup truck screeched around the corner. A man with a red face, messy hair, and wild eyes leaned out of the window screaming Daniel's name. People inside the diner gasped as the man slammed the brakes, jumped out, and stormed toward Daniel. It was his father. Hawk reacted instantly, stepping in front of Daniel just as the man lunged. The father pointed aggressively, shouting at the bikers to move aside and threatening what he'd do if they didn't. The whole street froze. This was the moment everyone feared, the moment they expected the bikers to explode into violence. The Black Ridge crew had a reputation, and everyone assumed this confrontation would turn ugly. But something no one expected happened next. Hawk didn't swing. Tank didn't shove. None of the bikers touched the man. Instead, Hawk calmly pulled out his phone and dialed. Daniel's father continued screaming, drawing all eyes in town. Shoppers stopped in the street. The chef stepped outside with a towel over his shoulder. The tension was thick, but Hawk stayed steady. The father shouted insults at his own son, calling him names that made a few customers cover their mouths. He tried to push past Hawk again, but one of the bikers simply stepped sideways to block him, not touching him, just standing between him and the boy. Daniel trembled behind Hawk, tears building. Seconds later, the sound of a siren echoed down the street. Every head turned. A police cruiser rolled in and Officer Reyes, a seasoned woman with a calm demeanor, stepped out. Hawk waved her over, giving a respectful nod. She recognized Daniel immediately from previous welfare check calls. Her face softened when she saw the bruises on his wrist. Daniel's father's anger faded instantly into defensive stuttering. "This is my son. He's mine. They're kidnapping him." Reyes ignored him and crouched near Daniel. "Did you run away because you felt unsafe?" Daniel hesitated. Then he gave the smallest nod. His father erupted again, but this time 2 officers approached him from the cruiser, telling him to step aside. The entire town watched in stunned silence. They had feared the bikers would break the peace. But instead, the bikers had been the only ones protecting a terrified child. Officer Reyes placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder and led him toward the police car. Daniel looked back at Hawk with wide, questioning eyes. He didn't want to go back home. He didn't want to be taken away from the only people who had shown him calmness today. "It's okay," Hawk said softly. "We're not going anywhere." Reyes reassured Daniel that they would contact child services and that he wouldn't be sent back into danger. Daniel nodded, relief washing through him for the first time in years. But the story didn't end there. Because that night, everything changed in Ridgewater. Word spread across the town like wildfire. People who had once crossed the street to avoid the Black Ridge crew now talked about how gently they protected that child. The diner owner, Betty May, walked outside, wiping a tear from her eye, and offered free food to the entire biker group. Hawk and his crew weren't used to kindness from strangers, but they accepted the food with quiet appreciation. They didn't do what they did for praise. They did it because Daniel reminded Hawk of his own childhood, a past he rarely talked about. Days later, when Child Services met with Daniel, Hawk asked if the crew could become his emergency contact. They weren't family by blood, but they were willing to be family by choice. Social Services approved supervised visits, and before long Daniel spent weekends with the bikers learning to fix engines, sitting around safe campfires, and eating more meals than he had in months. Ridgewater changed too. People began greeting the bikers rather than avoiding them. Kids waved at them as they rode through town. Betty May even named a milkshake after them, the Black Ridge Blizzard. And Daniel, for the first time in a long time, laughed again. He found a place where he belonged, where people protected him, not hurt him. In the end, the Black Ridge crew didn't become heroes by doing anything loud or violent. They became heroes by doing the quiet thing, listening, protecting, and stepping up when it mattered. Everyone feared them. No one expected what they did next, and it changed a boy's life forever. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories like this one. And tell me, from which part of the country are you watching this video?